It's been, I think, almost 40 years since the fall of Saigon. Tonight we're about to watch a documentary that chronicled the last 2 days of the Vietnam War. In April 1975, just as the Americans were preparing to withdraw from the territory, the North Vietnamese Army made their descent to Saigon, spreading much chaos to the region, particularly at the US Embassy. The American side were confronted with tough decisions, and some of them heroic, which led to the evacuation of 35,000 Vietnamese, a risky 48-hour effort that also had to be done in secret. It's a complex story, a dramatic story, which this documentary re-examines under Rory Kennedy's direction. Since this documentary premiered at Sundance Film Festival earlier this year, Last Days of Vietnam has been getting rave reviews. Unfortunately, the filmmaker can't be here tonight, but we will have executive producer of Last Days of Vietnam, Mark Samels, on Skype to share his insight. We also have a very special guest here tonight, Jim and Rory. Could you put your hand up, please? Former FCC president and a veteran TV broadcaster for NBC and ABC News, etc., who covered Vietnam during this period. Jim has been interviewed in this documentary we're about to watch, so he's perhaps the most knowledgeable person in this room who actually experienced the events described in this film. So we're very fortunate to have Jim here today. So he'll be here to share some insight during the Q&A session. So before we begin to screen, I'd just like to say thank you. From my understanding, this is the first screening in Asia. So we're very fortunate. Let's start the screening. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
Hi, welcome to, that was a very moving documentary, by the way. Okay, so I'd like to start the Q&As by asking Jim first, as the only American network correspondent in Vietnam during the critical days. Would you like to share your views on the content that was just presented? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, Mark, I don't want to take very much time away from you, but for any of us who were there, this film captures amazingly the emotion and the drama of what we all went through. And I'd like to make a couple of little comments about at least one person in the audience, because amongst the 35,000 people that were taken out by ship during that 24 hours was my wife, who happens to be in the audience, Sun San. And so that evacuation was very instrumental in her future in America. Those of us, and much of the film, I've seen the outtakes of this over many years, but the way Rory Kennedy put it all together is quite extraordinary. My colleague Neil Davis was the cameraman with me, and many of the images in the film, particularly towards the end at the US Embassy, are his, and of course the iconic shots of the North Vietnamese tank coming through the palace in Saigon. But I think it's also worth mentioning, before we get to Mark, that this club, of course, has a great association with the Vietnam War. So many of our past members were correspondents in Vietnam. Of course, Hugh Van Ness, and the iconic shot of the helicopter from the neighboring CIA building was in the film. And of course, Annie is with us tonight. A whole range of correspondence. This was, of course, not this location, but the old location of the FCC was headquarters for many correspondents that covered the war from the 60s through the 70s. But let me get Mark in on this and open it up to questions.
Please, Mark, would you have something to say?
Well, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you so much, Jim, for those kind words. The film has been in the making for the last couple of years. It was a difficult film to make in many respects, but because of I think the quality of the production team and the power of the story and the power of the commentators such as Jim, we feel extremely proud about the film and feel like it's can make a real contribution not only to the understanding of how the Vietnam War came to a close, but how any war comes to a close. And one of the things that's come out in the screenings across the country, and there have been over 100 theaters that we've had the film in, is that two things. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to get into a war and very little time thinking about how to get out of one. And secondly, that the diaspora of the Vietnamese to America is a very poorly understood story, and it's a powerful one. And I hope that this film places it more at the center of the story of America.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the floor. Are there any questions? And please identify yourself. We are also having a few mic problems, so speak up a little bit. Sorry. Gentleman there. Wait for the mic. Yes.
Yeah, Nick Thompson, no affiliation. I noticed something which I didn't know before. Mentioned in the film was that the North Vietnamese were very frightened of Richard Nixon, what he would do. What is your view on, if he wasn't impeached and he carried on, how would things have been different, do you think?
Well, having worked on a history series for nearly 20 years now, I know how foolish it is to speculate about what ifs. And but with all respect to your question, I think one of the things that is surprising about this story are the unintended consequences of events. We've always focused on Watergate as having a very specific political meaning for domestic politics in the United States. And here's another perspective, that it had a repercussion far away from the United States. It's a potentially debatable point. There are those who don't believe that that is the case, but it has a ring of truth to it. And so I think it's another example of how events ripple out into space.
If I might add one thing, my wife and I had a fairly senior Vietnamese communist cadre who was long after the war, and he was posted to Washington, D.C., and we had him to our home in Maine at the time. And he was very, very outspoken about how scary for him the 1972 bombing of Hanoi was. And he, at one point, confessed over a few beers, were they Bobby Bob beers, but anyway, whatever beers they were, that the North Vietnamese came very, very close to almost, frustration and giving up because of the bombing. So there was a sense of the extreme bombing. However, the other thing that is worth pointing out is once it was very, very clear that Nixon could not, re-enter the war, the North Vietnamese rallied tremendously. Of course, they had support from from China and from the Soviet Union. They had plenty of support, and they pursued very, very diligently. However, I interviewed General Zung, who was the commander of the final Great Spring victory, and he said that even they were surprised by how fast they were able to come south, and they were way ahead of their timetable. If I could just ask maybe one question, and then we can continue. Mark, this film will be on television in America in April, as I understand, on public broadcasting through the American Experience, of which you are the executive producer. There are a number of journalists, of which I am one, who have written a fair amount about the film and some of the historical issues. They're all very small, really, and they deal with the Paris peace talks and that period between 1973 and 75. I was wondering, in the discussion that will ensue, and the Vietnam War remains the most divisive war, I would say, maybe apart from the Civil War, in American history. And I'm wondering if there'll be an opportunity through the web or through PBS to have a sort of revisiting some of these debating points, if you will, that are raised peripherally in Rory's film.
Yes, Jim. We always have a robust online presence surrounding our films. you're exactly right. I mean, I don't think you need to qualify it at all. I think the psychic wound Vietnam War left on America is the 20th century analog to the Civil War in the 19th century. I think that's why this story is so important. It's very much not a film to recapitulate the Vietnam War. That's much too complex a subject. The war is basically over in our film from the very start. And it's really a film about 1975, which is the extraction of Vietnamese and Americans from Vietnam. But I think it showed, what you pointed out is exactly the case, that anything that touches this raw nerve brings up a lot of emotions, a lot of opinions, a lot of feelings, and we will find a way to channel that. We've already started that process by having a theatrical release of the film. We hope it'll qualify it does qualify. We hope it'll receive an Oscar nomination. We're going to be having community screenings across the country with veterans groups and Vietnamese American groups over the next 4 months, leading up to the broadcast in April on PBS, which will be seen by millions of people. And then an afterlife streaming on the web for months afterwards, and then DVD release after that. So this will be a film that'll be available for conversations, both organized and spontaneous, for a long time to come.
Are there any more questions from the floor? Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you there.
Out of the way.
Hi, David Stout. I'm a reporter with Time Magazine and former resident of Hanoi for 2 years. And I was back in Vietnam in September, and I was talking with the American Vietnam War vets, and also following this when the release came out on online forums. And there's quite a robust debate going on right now with that last line. And if I could ask you, with the executions that took place, there is a lot of arguments going back and forth. What historical evidence did you guys base that last line off of?
Could you, the line that you're referring to is the fact that an untold number were killed?
Right. That's the line that there's a lot of argument back and forth going on about whether there was any systematic executions, whether there were none recorded. What is the historical evidence that the film based that last line on?
Well, there's been a fairly active scholarly effort to try to nail down something more precise. We debated this a great deal. There are various estimations with a wide range. Of course, the documentation coming out of Vietnam is scant. There's just a heck of a lot of anecdotal evidence. I'll say that I was with the film last week in Toronto, and again, this is anecdotal, and I had a woman come up to me with her very aged mother to tell me in detail the story of her father being taken away to a re-education camp and the word that they received that he had been shot the next month. We've heard that repeatedly over and over again. Does a handful of anecdotal stories like that make for anything conclusive? No, but because of a lack of records, to simply ignore the fact that the stakes were large, we felt was wrong as well. So it's a purposefully open-ended statement at the very end to say that we know that there were people who were killed in these camps. We've heard the first-person testimony of that. We don't know the scale, we don't know the number, but we tried to find a middle ground, and this is often the case with stories like this, where the precision that journalism seeks out, sometimes history frustrates.
I might add one thing, and Mark, forgive me if I'm giving away something here, but in the original cut that was shown at Sundance Film Festival when I was there, a number was attached to those numbers of executions. I think the producers, the director wisely changed that at the end to an unknown number, because there are so many different numbers. The North Vietnamese, of course, will say very few, if any. The South Vietnamese will say hundreds of thousands. The truth we don't know. Neil Davis, who I work with, who I remained 1 month after the fall of Saigon. Neil remained 3 months. He chronicles at least 1 or 2 executions during the time that he was there in the 3 months. But we really don't know the answer to that question, and I don't think we ever will, really.
Any more questions? We have a gentleman over there. Oh.
Hi, I just had a question. You referred to the film being about betrayal, and I'm wondering, given that we're 10 years into 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, do you think the U.S. kind of learned any real hard lessons about standing by our allies there? There have been a lot of instances of contractors and other people that have been associated with the American cause in those countries kind of being left out to dry, and I'm just wondering are we seeing history repeat itself on a smaller scale there?
That's a good question.
Well, if I heard you correctly, I thought you said that the film says that it's a story of betrayal. Stuart Harrington says it's a story of betrayal. That's one opinion. This is a point that comes up a lot. And when I commissioned the film, when I asked Rory to make the film several years ago, I knew a couple of things. One, I knew that if you took this story of the evacuation that happened in a number of different arenas, the ships, the embassy, the helicopters, the city, the countryside, you had a powerful story that was very little known, at least in the United States. The other thing I knew was that we would be somewhere in the process of withdrawing from 2 wars, and that this might make a contribution. There are some glib comments about history repeating itself. I think Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. What seems to be true, though, is that one of the most difficult things to do is to project to the end of a conflict and imagine how it ends, and how it ends on terms that you want it to end when you enter into it. And that, I think, Vietnam shows in spades, and we are certainly living through some of those questions right now.
We have another question from the lady at the back.
Annette Johnson, a member with no affiliation. I'm just curious, really, why have you made this movie now? Or put another way, why have you waited so long?
Well, I thought I went some ways towards answering the question in the previous answer about the fact that I felt that there was a certain timeliness to it, given that several years ago, we knew we would be withdrawing by now from Iraq, and that there had been an announcement that there were plans to withdraw from Afghanistan. That was not the prime motivation, though. I mean, I run a history series, and frankly, what led me to this story was a radio report about the USS Kirk, and it stunned me with its power and with, quite honestly, the fact that I thought I knew this story and I did not. And I quickly discovered that I wasn't alone, that everything I thought I knew about the end of the Vietnam War was wrong, including the iconic photograph, which was not the U.S. Embassy. And the more I investigated, the more I realized how little I did know and how little anyone knew about what happened here. As Jim, I'm sure, can testify more than anyone, the chaos that ensued there made it extremely hard to get a big picture sense of what was going on. And the way it collapsed so quickly compounded that problem, such that you had all these little fragmentary stories that had never really been put together into a whole. There have been some admirable attempts done through books, and some of those people are in the film, but the gestalt of the whole story really had never come together, and that's the challenge I set to Rory to take apart. So, we don't chase headlines because our films take too long to make, typically. But I knew that there was a background context of relevancy that I hope we could tap into, and I think we have.
Question, I see Francis's hand up there.
Francis Moriarty, freelance and member of the board here at the FCC. This was aired on PBS, I believe, public broadcasting? No, I see you shaking your head. That's my first question.
Did you ask if it had been aired already?
Yeah, on PBS, or you work for PBS and this has not been, I was not clear on that point.
It's going to air in April for the 40th anniversary.
All right, so my question then becomes, is this war still so politically sensitive in the United States that you have to be at all careful in how you're presenting this, especially doing it on PBS, which is not every politician in America's favorite network?
You know, I wouldn't get very much sleep if I worried about that too much. We had a film on the air about 4 years ago about My Lai, which is probably one of the darkest moments of the Vietnam War. What I felt good about that film was that when it was done, we heard from both Vietnamese who had experienced that tragedy and felt that it was fair, and from Charlie Company, who called us and wrote us and said that it was the first time that they felt that they had been presented in a balanced way. We strive to really tell history in a straightforward, non-agenda manner. I don't think this film has got an obvious agenda behind it. I think what history deals you in this story is as dramatic as any play, quite honestly. You've got, it's, you know, to use a hackneyed phrase, it's Shakespearean in a way. You've got this backdrop of chaos and catastrophe, many years in the making, and you've got this foreground of individuals facing moral decisions, and how they act in those extreme circumstances is sort of, you know, a pitched story that has been, you know, carried through history going back to Aeschylus. And I think that very rarely do you find a story that has such a powerful human dilemma in front of a historical context like this. And each one of these individuals who's in the foreground of this story, whether they're flying their family out to a ship into the unknown, or whether they're standing there holding a machine gun guarding a door at the embassy, is at a moment, a juncture of their own personal lives about how they will behave, what is right, what is wrong. That's a powerful story. That transcends any time. That's a story that needs to be told over and over again.
Any more questions from the floor? Nope. Okay, so Mark, if anyone here would like to get a copy of the DVD or want to watch it in the theaters in Hong Kong, maybe, how would they have access to this content?
Well, the program will be available on streaming on pbs.org as of April. It'll be available on DVD at the same time. Sure, we're going to have international distribution. I don't know if we've done a deal with Hong Kong yet to get it distributed. I'm sure it's going to be shown a great deal. I'm hopeful, Jim knows this, I'm hopeful that we, next April, will have a screening in Vietnam of the film. I think we've talked to the presumptive ambassador from the United States to Vietnam, who has not yet been approved, about having that screening. I know that's not Hong Kong, but it's in the general direction, and we're hoping that that'll raise awareness of the film in your part of the world.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark Samels, Jim Rory, everyone from attending this event. Thank you.